What you are watching right now is not a functioning defense system. It is a defense system with a pre-programmed decision about whose life is worth saving. 3 confirmed facts right now in real time. 1. Iran's missiles penetrated Israel's celebrated Iron Dome at double the rate in the second half of June's conflict than they did in the first, a doubling that happened because Iran was actively learning mid-war how to crack the code. 2. The United States burned through roughly 1/4 of its entire global THAAD interceptor stockpile in 12 days trying to cover those gaps. 12 days, 1/4, gone. 3. 120,000 Palestinian citizens living inside Israel's internationally recognized borders have zero missile protection, not reduced protection. Zero. The Iron Dome's own algorithm is programmed to let missiles fall on their towns. This does not look like a defense system. It looks like a hierarchy of who deserves to survive. Here is why this matters beyond the region you are looking at on a map. Over 400 Iranian missiles and several hundred drones struck Israel during the June 2025 conflict, according to data from the Jewish Institute for National Security of America. Among those, Iranian projectiles reached the Haifa refinery, a critical energy node, killing 3 workers. They reached the heart of Tel Aviv. They struck military installations, and they killed 4 women in the Palestinian town of Tamra, women who had no shelter to run to. 2 million Palestinian citizens, 21% of Israel's own population, live inside this defense gap. That is not a detail. That is a structural collapse. And the moment Iran fully maps every hole in that architecture, the entire strategic calculus of the Middle East shifts, including your energy bill, your supply chains, and the readiness of the very American military assets meant to protect you. In the next few minutes, I am going to show you exactly how we got here, and why the world you are living in today is measurably more dangerous than the one you woke up in last week. Imagine you run a high-security vault. You spend billions on the best alarm system in the world. Lasers, motion sensors, titanium locks. You tell the press it is impenetrable. But inside the building, you quietly decide that a portion of your own employees do not deserve access to the safe room. You code them out of the security system and call the area they work in an open zone. Now imagine your adversary is watching. They probe the perimeter every few months, analyzing where the response comes and where it does not. Over time, they map every unprotected corridor, and they begin routing their attacks directly through those open zones. You built a fortress with deliberate holes in it, told the world it was sealed, and handed your adversary a blueprint. Hold that thought, because that is exactly what the Israeli government just did. Drop your answer below. Do you believe it is possible to have a genuine national security strategy that systematically leaves 20% of your own citizens unprotected? Let us rewind the clock. For years, Israel built what it marketed to the world as the gold standard of civilian defense. The Iron Dome, David's Sling, the Arrow system, billions of dollars, layered, networked, celebrated. The plan was to create an impenetrable aerial shield. The assumption was that no adversary could saturate it, overwhelm it, or learn how to navigate around it. The intelligence, including internal Israeli assessments, warned repeatedly that the system had structural gaps, that Arab communities were critically underprotected, and that adversaries were studying Israeli interception patterns. The IDF dismissed those warnings. In February 2025, Israel's own military inquiry, published and reported by Reuters, confirmed in black and white that the Israeli military had drastically underestimated the capabilities of its adversaries, had relied too heavily on intelligence, barriers, and defensive measures alone, and had, in the inquiry's own words, failed in its mission to protect Israeli civilians. That finding was published for October 7, 2023, but the architecture that made October 7 possible, the same conceptual overconfidence, the same ranked hierarchy of who deserves protection, was still operational when Iranian missiles began falling in June 2025. The IDF did not learn the lesson, or more precisely, it learned it too slowly, while Iran learned it faster. Receipt number 1. Israel's own military said it failed. On February 27, 2025, Reuters published the findings of the Israeli military's internal investigation into October 7, 2023. The report, conducted by the IDF itself, stated, not alleged, not accused, but stated, that the Israeli military had failed in its mission to protect Israeli civilians. It confirmed a systemic belief that Hamas could be managed through economic pressure rather than genuine deterrence. It confirmed that commanders did not perceive an urgent threat and failed to reinforce the border. It confirmed over-reliance on barriers and intelligence alone. And in a detail that should have triggered immediate structural reform, the investigation found that Israel had shifted its intelligence focus toward Lebanon and Hezbollah, leaving Gaza's threat assessment dangerously hollow. The editorial interpretation of that fact is this: a military apparatus that admits it failed catastrophically at its core mission in 2023, and then continues operating under many of the same assumptions in 2025, is not a military that has reformed. It is a military that has written a report about its failure and filed it. Receipt number 2. Iran cracked the code in real time. and the numbers prove it. According to data published by the Jewish Institute for National Security of America, analyzed in the Wall Street Journal, Iran's missiles breached Israeli defenses at a rate of 8% in the first half of the June 2025 conflict. By the second half of that same 12-day war, that penetration rate had climbed to 16%, double. And on June 22nd, 2 days before the ceasefire, 10 out of 27 Iranian missiles hit Israel directly. That is a 37% success rate on a single day. Iran was not launching randomly. It was conducting live combat-validated research on the world's most celebrated missile defense system, learning in real time where the interceptors fail, where coverage is thin, and where saturation breaks the algorithm. To cover those gaps, American forces fired between 100 and 150 THAAD interceptors, each costing an estimated $12.7 million. That expenditure reportedly consumed roughly 1/4 of the entire United States THAAD stockpile. In 12 days. The JINSA analyst Ari Securel said it plainly. What we had before isn't enough. That baseline is not sufficient. Here's the part that should make your eyes open wide. Receipt number 3. The Iron Dome algorithm is deliberately programmed to let missiles fall on Arab neighborhoods. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is documented, publicly reported, and confirmed by Israeli civil rights organizations. The Israel Democracy Institute confirmed that Palestinian citizens of Israel do not receive equal protection. A 2022 state comptroller audit found that over 70% of homes in Palestinian communities lack a safe room meeting code standards, compared to 25% of Jewish homes. The Arab town of Rahat, home to 80,000 Palestinian citizens located near Gaza, has 0 public shelters. Not a shortage. 0. Meanwhile, the nearby Jewish town of Ofakim, half the size of Rahat, has dozens. An estimated 120,000 residents across 35 Arab towns have no protection whatsoever from missiles or from Iron Dome interceptors detonating above them. And the algorithm? Israel's defense ministry defines the Iron Dome as a system that decides via radar whether a missile will fall in a populated area. Arab towns and unrecognized Bedouin villages are pre-coded as open zones, meaning the system is instructed not to intercept. When an Iranian missile killed 4 women from the same family in Tamra in June 2025, Prime Minister Netanyahu said, "Missiles don't differentiate between Jews and Arabs. The Iron Dome, Mr. Netanyahu, does. Now let us look at what the officials said, and then let us look at what actually happened." Benjamin Netanyahu stated publicly after Iranian missiles killed 4 Palestinian women in Tamra, Iran's missiles target all of Israel, Jews and Arabs alike. Here is what that actually means. It is technically true that Iranian missiles do not check ethnic identifiers before detonating. What it ignores, with surgical precision, is that Israel's own defense system absolutely does make that distinction. The Iron Dome's algorithm is programmed to allow missiles to fall in Palestinian areas designated as open zones. Netanyahu's statement is not wrong. It is a misdirection. It uses the indiscriminate nature of the Iranian weapon to erase the discriminatory nature of the Israeli response. That is not a defense of your citizens. That is a politician exploiting their deaths as a rhetorical prop. Then there is the IDF's official framing in the wake of October 7th. A statement from the Prime Minister's office said, on the day the military investigation was published, that the military had not shared its findings with the Prime Minister. Read that again. The military that failed catastrophically to protect civilians, in its own words, did not share the findings of that failure with the head of government. These are not serious people managing a serious crisis. These are performers staging confidence while the architecture of civilian protection continues to collapse around them. When governments cannot guarantee your physical safety, staying informed is not optional. It is the only real edge you have. The events unfolding in the Middle East are moving faster than any single news source can track. That is why I want to take 60 seconds to talk about today's sponsor. So what does this actually mean for you? Start with energy. Iranian missiles struck the Haifa refinery during June's conflict. That is not a symbolic target. That is infrastructure directly connected to regional fuel supply chains. If escalation resumes, and experts at the Times of Israel and JINSA are explicitly warning that it may, possibly with Iran preempting the next round, the disruption to global energy markets will be immediate and felt at every pump and every power bill in your world. If the United States is drawn back into active THAAD operations in a second Iran-Israel war, the depletion of American interceptor stockpiles does not stay in the Middle East. It reduces the defensive umbrella available to NATO commitments, to Taiwan, to every theater where American air defense assets are currently allocated. If Israel's civilian protection architecture remains a two-tier system that excludes 20% of its own population, you are watching a democracy, one that receives billions in American military funding, institutionalize the abandonment of its own citizens. That is a precedent. This situation is not slowing down, and what happens in the next 12 months will determine whether the Middle East stabilizes under a fragile ceasefire or slides toward the most dangerous multi-front escalation the region has seen in decades. If this analysis is connecting dots you have not seen assembled anywhere else, hit subscribe right now. The next chapter is developing fast, and you cannot afford to miss it. Scenario 1. The ceasefire holds. American production lines accelerate. The Munitions Acceleration Council, already activated by the Pentagon, succeeds in replenishing THAAD stockpiles within 12 to 18 months. Israel uses the window to finally fund civilian protection infrastructure in Arab communities, not out of moral clarity, but out of strategic necessity, having learned that unprotected zones are exploitable gaps. Iran, its own military capacity degraded by Israeli strikes, delays its next move. In this scenario, fragile stability returns. The key variable is whether the United States replenishes interceptor stocks fast enough to make a second war feel unwinnable for Tehran. Even in the best case, Iran has now permanently documented every gap in Israel's defense architecture. That intelligence does not disappear. Scenario 2, the middle path. Interceptor stocks are only partially replenished. Israel patches some gaps in its defense coverage, but the political will to fund Arab communities does not materialize. The discrimination continues, and the exploitable open zones remain coded into the system. Iran rebuilds its ballistic missile arsenal, incorporating the targeting data it gathered during June's live-fire intelligence operation. Within 12 to 18 months, a second exchange begins, this time with Iran entering the conflict already knowing the exact saturation threshold at which Israeli defenses fail. The damage is significantly worse. American military commitment is more constrained. The region does not recover cleanly. Scenario 3. The American THAAD stockpile is not replenished in time. Iran, calculating that the window of Israeli vulnerability is closing, decides to preempt the next Israeli strike rather than absorb it. Simultaneously, Hezbollah, which explicitly held back during June's 12-day conflict watching and learning, enters the equation. The Houthis sustain a parallel ballistic missile campaign from Yemen. Israel's multi-layered system, already tested to its limits in June, faces simultaneous saturation from 3 directions. The 2 million Palestinian citizens of Israel, still with zero shelter infrastructure, have nowhere to go. The Haifa refinery, the port of Ashdod, and military installations across the country are all within range. That is the scenario nobody wants to say out loud. But it exists, and the decisions being made right now are moving us toward it. Here is what I need you to understand. The Iron Dome is not a shield. It is a filter, and it was deliberately programmed to filter out the lives of 120,000 of its own citizens. That is not a defense failure. That is a defense choice. Every government on Earth is watching and learning the lesson, not just about missile technology, but about what happens when a state builds its security architecture on the assumption that some lives are worth protecting and others are not. Iran learned a purely military lesson. Saturate, adapt, and double your penetration rate in 12 days. The rest of the world is learning a different one, that the world's most celebrated missile defense system has a kill switch built in, and it points inward. The cold open of this video asked you whether what you were watching was a defense system. Now you know the answer. It is a system of selection, and when the next salvo comes, and the experts are telling you it will, the gaps that were programmed in by political decision will not close themselves. The missiles will know exactly where to go, because Iran already showed them. 2 questions I need your answer on. Did Iran outmaneuver Israel's defense system, or did Israel's own political choices hand Iran the blueprint? And second, if you were living in one of those 35 Arab towns with zero shelter coverage, would you call that a democracy worth defending? Drop your answers in the comments. I read every single one, and the debate in this community is always more honest than anything you will find in a government press release. Subscribe because the next chapter, Iran's arsenal rebuild, America's THAAD replenishment race, and whether Hezbollah finally enters the equation, is coming fast. This story is not slowing down. Do not look away.